Hi, it's Makaela here. Thanks for listening to my podcast. What you're about to listen to is an old episode of my podcast, The Midlife Awakening, which has now been replaced with the Deliberately Transformed Woman podcast. You'll still find some golden takeaways in these old episodes, but if you're the type of person who wants to discover and let go of the things that are holding you back in life by busting through fear and procrastination, overcoming imposter syndrome, and stepping into a life that is fulfilling, courageous, and intentional, then my new podcast episodes, starting from episode 21, are the ones you're looking for. You're listening to episode 11 of the Midlife Awakening podcast with Makaela Moore. Welcome to the Midlife Awakening podcast. I'm Makaela Moore, your host and certified transformation coach. I'm a 40-something woman who nerds out on brain science and believes every woman should be financially independent. This podcast is for women navigating their midlife who want to learn the secrets to unlocking their brain and freeing themselves from everything that holds them back so they can create lasting change in their lives, because everything is possible. Join me each week for conversations about the midlife and tips and tricks to hack your subconscious brain so you can deliberately transform your life and ultimately create your own financial security. First time here? Hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Enjoy! Welcome to episode 11. I hope you are all happy and well and having an amazing week. Have you listened to last week's podcast yet? Episode 10 was all about the countdown to the new year and why resolutions don't work. If you haven't listened to that one yet, go back and listen to that one before this one, because I think you'll get so much more out of this one as part 2. Last week I spoke about the end of year being upon us and the end of year rush for work and school and holidays and Christmas, etc. And then of course comes the new year with all the pressures of setting New Year's resolutions and goals for the new year and getting back to work and getting kids back to school. All of this is really taxing on our brains and contributes to brain overload and decision fatigue. And we can just fall in a heap of exhaustion, wondering what the heck happened. In the last episode, I said I would go further into the brain overload and brain care side of things this week and explain why we get so overwhelmed and how we can change that. The end of the year is a truly manic time for most people. I believe Christmas should be a relaxing and stress-free time. I used to go all in on organising every minute detail for Christmas, from decorations to presents, wrappings, food. The food. I have been known to start cooking for Christmas lunch 2 days earlier. I used to allow myself to be totally consumed with all the planning. But it just all got too much and I was not enjoying Christmas Day. I wasn't having the true, enjoyable family experience that I wanted. Everyone else did, but because I agonised over every detail, I didn't. And ultimately, while I thought I was doing it for everyone, I was really just doing it for myself. Because if I pulled off the perfect Christmas, everyone would like me. But that is a story for another day and not where we're going with this episode. Today, though, I want to talk about information overload and decision fatigue and basically becoming anxious and having meltdowns over seemingly simple things in life. And it is way more common than we realise. A lot of people are just really good at hiding it. So, as I mention regularly, we have our reptilian or our subconscious brain, which has one job, which is to keep us alive and protect our survival. The subconscious brain is our old brain, and humans had this brain when we evolved from being cave women. This is the brain that rules so much of what we do or don't do. And then, of course, we have our conscious brain, or the prefrontal cortex, which is the more modern brain that's been evolving since we emerged from the caves and became fully fledged modern-day humans. This part of the brain is the thinking, perceptive part of the brain. It's our critical thinking, analytical part. It's our smart brain. These two brains are separate, but of course they're connected. Basically, everything we experience in life comes into our brain as sensory information through all of our five senses, which are sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. Everything we touch or feel or hear or see or taste or smell is sent to our brain as pieces of information. These pieces of information flood into our brain, and our brain needs to tell us how to respond to these pieces of sensory information. We firstly process them in our conscious brain by recognizing or identifying what they are, and then our subconscious brain takes over in analysing whether this piece of information needs to be enacted upon or reacted to or dismissed altogether. Our brain is just there going about its job of keeping us alive, which includes keeping us safe, so it is kept busy reacting to every single piece of information to keep us safe. Like if we feel something burning hot, our brain processes that feeling of the heat and very quickly tells us to stop touching the hot pan. Or if we feel pain, the brain is quick to respond to let us know that the knife has just nicked our finger and we kind of need to stop before we, chop our whole finger off. Our brain processes the smell and taste of everything we eat, and that's how we know not to drink the off milk or eat the rotten meat, because our brain processes the smell and or the taste of them and yells at us to not eat or drink them, thereby keeping us safe from food poisoning. When we are driving and we see someone pull out in front of us, our brain sees the events unfolding in front of us, takes that information in, analyses it in the situation, and then reacts very quickly in making us slam our foot on the brake, possibly turning the wheel and avoiding a crash. Our brain is flooded with millions of these messages every single day. These come in the forms of our everyday activities. We hear our alarms and the birds and our kids in the morning. We feel the urge to go and pee first thing. We feel the hot shower soothing our achy bodies. We smell the coffee. We taste the burnt toast. We see the clock ticking. Or we hear the clock ticking as well. We hear the notification pings on our phone. We feel our clothing and how annoying our bra is where it's rubbing in the wrong spot. We smell the freshly cut grass as we walk to the car. We see and hear the hectic traffic on the way to school. And that is all just to get the kids to school. Our brains process tons and tons of information every single day, and they are efficient. If a piece of information is not important, it will still process it anyway to analyse it, but then quickly disregard it as unimportant, so it can just go about analysing the next million pieces of information flooding in. But it has to process each piece of information first to know whether it's something that is important or something threatening and needs responding to. Our brains are seriously supercomputers and we don't even think about it. Our whole day is filled with incoming data. Every single thing we see, hear, taste, touch, smell or feel, it is all incoming data. So if you think of your brain as that supercomputer, but a computer that, while it has a good storage memory, can only process so much information at any one time. So maybe it just means that it's short on RAM. If there is too much information, it can have a little meltdown, and like any good PC, probably needs a restart. Our brain processes millions of thoughts a day, which uses about 25% of our energy sources. So the energy that it takes to process all the information that is dumped on it causes the brain to put us in a state of survival mode, because the brain just can't keep up with the backlog of information. So it throws us into that fight, flight or freeze mode, and we're exhausted. So flight mode is when we react to a situation, and not usually in the best way possible. This can lead to aggressive behaviour, arguments, saying or doing things we later regret, etc., particularly in kids because they're still developing their sensory processing system and haven't yet learned how to deal with information overwhelm, so they can lash out and have tantrums, as too can adults, I've learned. Flight mode is running away from the situation, which could look like retreating, backing down, walking away, avoidance, denial, or even procrastination. Freeze mode is a shutdown response where we disassociate and we simply don't even hear people and we block things out, which could explain a lot of times why our kids aren't listening to us. We can only stay in any of these states for a limited time until we ultimately experience a meltdown. In the case of a real life danger, where we go into survival mode until the threat has passed and our brain then knows the threat is gone and it can return to normal programming. But when our threat is only perceived, then there is never really an end to it. So we can live in a perpetual state of survival mode, which equates to a complete sensory information overload. We struggle to make good decisions in the fight, flight, or freeze mode because all the blood has drained from our brain and organs and gone to our muscles so we can run from the scary predator, which is why someone in a state of anxiety or aggression can't easily be reasoned with because their brain is kind of checked out momentarily. Our brains are simply overloaded with information. We are receiving more information into our brains these days than any other time in history. We have access to an enormous amount of information, thanks mostly to the internet. We have social media just spewing information at us. We're seeing things from all around the world, not just local information. And if we don't know something, we just Google it. Every piece of this information needs to be processed by the brain so it can decide what to do with the information. And the more we are seeing and doing on the internet and in real life is more information for the brain to process. We're also living in a world where we have more stimulation than ever before. Our houses and our kids' bedrooms and classrooms have so much more in them these days than they ever did back when we were kids or when our parents were kids. Life is no longer simple like it used to be back in the day. To our brains, life is simply chaotic these days, and our brains were never programmed for chaotic. We're living in a world where information of all kinds is all around us and it finds its way to us in all forms. And our brains are doing triple time to process it all, which is why when we get back to nature without our phones and computers and TVs, we feel rejuvenated. The last few weekends, we've been going and spending some time out in the bush, doing some off-roading and simply just soaking in nature. We've been going to a place where there is no Wi-Fi signal, so it forces us to just stare at trees, hear the sounds of nature, smell the bush air, feel the warmth and the breeze, to reconnect with the earth's vibration and just be. We return from those days happy and reconnected with ourselves and each other and just mentally refreshed. So what I've just described is sensory overload. It can happen to anyone, and it generally happens to most of us on, pretty much a daily basis. Having a sensory processing disorder, however, is sort of the same, but with one big difference. Those with a sensory processing disorder have a much lower threshold for how much stimulation and information their brain can cope with. So essentially, their brains overload faster than other people's. Their inbuilt supercomputer crashes way earlier than other people's. Some people can simply deal with a lot more sensory stimulation, such as noise and light and activity, etc., before they're in a state of sensory overload, while people with a sensory processing disorder have a much lower threshold and just can't cope with as much stimulation. Oftentimes, by the time the messages are getting into the brain of a person with a sensory processing disorder, they can be jumbled up messages, and the energy that the brain uses to make sense of the messages can cause them to go into an overloaded state. I know for myself, I struggle with this in the mornings. I need my mornings to be a very calm and quiet environment. Not to say that I'm not a morning person and that I stumble around like a grump, not at all. I actually quite enjoy waking up with the birds, and I enjoy early mornings. I enjoy the sound of the trees and the birds and the nature outside, but for me it's the endless noise and talking of people around me that can really grind on me first thing in the morning. And it can be simple things like being hit with question after question, as 7-year-olds tend to do, or constant chatter, or the dogs barking, or, Sid riding her scooter in the house, or annoying music being played. Basically, just any annoying noises get me in the mornings. Even if none of those are particularly loud, they can just really trigger me into sensory overload, which for me can feel like my brain is just going to implode. I simply need a quiet, calm environment in the mornings, which, when trying to get everyone ready for school and work and out the door, can be a huge issue. I can end up cranky and snappy and, not the most pleasant. For me, it is all feelings in my head though. But for a lot of people, it can actually come through as physical feelings where, particular noises or just too much noise can make them feel itchy and physically uncomfortable in their clothes or their skin. One lady I know said that it makes her feel like she's being slapped repeatedly. Everyone has a threshold for how much information they can take in at any one time. So even people who don't have a sensory processing disorder can reach a level where something triggers them and they implode or they explode. People often just refer to this as stress and don't think about the underlying reasons for it. As adults, though, we have fully formed sensory systems, so we can logically think through and control our reactions to our external environments. Like for my mornings, I know that when I'm triggered by noise, I can take steps to calm my brain through deep breath and thought, or playing a song that I know will be calming to my brain. But children don't have fully formed sensory systems yet, which is why they have tantrums and meltdowns, because they don't yet know how to cope with what they're feeling. The best way to manage this is actually to reduce the amount of sensory information input to start with. This can be a wide variety of tactics, but the more of these that you can do, the greater the reduction in that overall input. Simplifying things when and wherever possible is probably one of the biggest things you can do. There's no need to overcomplicate most things in our life, so find a simpler way to do things. For some reason, humans love complicating things and we don't need to. So start by simplifying your thinking, your doing, your activities. Basically simplify your whole life. And it can be by decluttering your house or your car or your diary, your email inbox, your Facebook newsfeed or your friend list, your computer files, your office, your desk. Declutter everything possible in your life. Minimalism is very soothing and calming to the brain, and our homes and schools and workplaces have just so much more stuff than we ever have had in the past. This is something we have definitely been working on in our house, because when we met, I had a whole house full of stuff. My husband had a house full of stuff. His mum, who lives in the granny flat at our place, she also had a house full of stuff. And then we bought new stuff together and we ended up with sheds full of stuff that we just didn't need. So we've been progressively decluttering our house and our sheds, and every time we get rid of another big load of stuff, it just feels like a big relief. And sometimes it's a toxic person in your life that you need to get rid of. When we declutter and remove all the excess stuff, it is just less stuff for us to see, and therefore our brains no longer have to process that information. I know anytime my desk gets into a mess, I can't think properly. So stopping to tidy it up helps to clear my mind and return me to a state of productivity. So look around your house at how you can reduce all the things you can see, hear, feel, smell, touch, taste in the spaces that you can control. If it's a noise issue, create a space for yourself. If possible, close a door for a while or pop on some noise-cancelling headphones with either some music that you love or just plain silence to minimize the sounds around you and just give your brain a break. Smells are also important. Having some essential oil diffusers around the house, particularly if you've got some calming oils going in them, can really help. And hopefully you won't then be smelling the bin or the stinky shoes. When it comes to technology, turn off as many notifications as you can. There is nothing more annoying than the constant pings and bings and beeps and all of the different notifications on our phones. I used to have way too many on my phone and it just drove me mental. But when I turned off all the ones that I really didn't need, only leaving maybe about 3 absolutely necessary ones, honestly, it made more of a difference than I could ever have imagined. just being able to sit and work without being interrupted every couple of minutes with another notification was a huge difference. And what happens when these come in is, even if you have consciously decided to not look at your phone for the next hour or two or however long, every time one of these notifications come in, firstly, it distracts you from what you were doing. And even if you continue what you were doing, your brain is in the background wondering what that notification was. Is it important? Shall we check it? You know, it might be something urgent. Maybe someone might need you. Could be an emergency. What if someone's injured or dead? So the whole time our brain is processing all these thoughts, we're distracted from what we were, trying to work on. So we give in just to quieten down our brain. And then we check the phone. But we don't just look at the one notification. We see a couple of others in there and, Susie's posted something adorable, and some woman called Mary, she caught my eye with her latest promotion, and down the rabbit hole of social media we fall. Then when we come back up from that hole, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour later, and let's be honest, we've all done it, picked up our phone to check one thing, got lost in the rabbit hole, and then possibly even forgotten to do the one thing that we went in there to do. But when we do come back to reality and get back to what we were doing, your brain is still processing all the information that you've just uploaded to it, as well as trying to get you back into the headspace of what you were working on in the first place. And your brain is prioritizing all the new things because it needs to sort out whether any of them pose a threat to you and whether you need to take any action to protect your mere survival. Going between tasks like that is actually called context switching. And while at the time it might not seem like much, but when we switch context and go from one thing to another, we waste an awful lot of time and brain processing power in the switch. That's why true multitasking doesn't work well. We can only ever truly think about one thing at a time, and we can only ever do one thing effectively at a time. Just think of all the extra data input and information overload we are giving our brains when we switch context. It's confusing for our brains and terrible for our productivity and clarity. Brain overload is one of the great causes of procrastination. Our brain is overloaded and needs a break. So it finds all the bright shiny lights that are easy on your brain to distract you with. So turn off the notifications, block out times to look at that stuff all at once, and in between those times, focus on what truly matters to you, whether it's a work task or something personal or family. Our brains have never had so much information input ever in the history of mankind, and our phones are just filling our heads with unnecessary information all the time. Sitting in silence is another awesome way to calm your mind and manage information overload. I had to do an exercise as part of one of the coaching programs I'm taking, and we had to sit in complete silence with no phone, no books, no TV, no distractions at all, and just think for 4 whole hours. It was quite a profound exercise and definitely clears out the mental clutter and all the monkey mind chatter. Meditation for me is a non-negotiable these days, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes in between other things. Just sit with a meditation in your ears and focus on nothing but your breathing and how your body feels. Controlled breathing, which is what happens during meditation, activates our vagus nerve, which engages our nervous system, and it reduces our heart rate and our respiratory system and leads to relaxation. The more we can do this in a controlled manner, the more that vagus nerve is engaged, and like any muscle, the more it's used, the stronger it's going to be, which means that the stronger your vagus nerve is, the more you will reduce your anxiety levels. Our brains also respond to physical movement, even if it's just a good old stretch for a couple of minutes. When we move, whether it's stretching, walking, running, yoga, whatever it is, our bodies experience another sense called proprioception, which is an awareness of the position and movement of the body. When we're doing movements of any kind, our body sends sensations of movement to our brain via some receptors, and these feelings and subsequent chemical releases help keep our brains organised, like, I suppose, doing a defrag on that dodgy PC. So get up and stretch and go for a walk at lunchtime. Just any kind of movement is really good for our brains. Be strategic about the information that you input. Our brains process our own voices much easier because it recognizes our own voice and knows that it's not a danger. Therefore, when we're hearing our own voice, whether it be by talking or listening to a recording of our own voice or even screaming, we are blocking out all the other noises around us and again, giving our brains a break. If we listen to something specific like a podcast or an audio book, we are also blocking out all the other noises and again, it gives our brains a break. Music is also so good for the brain. More parts of the brain activate simultaneously when we experience music than by doing anything else. This could be playing, listening, even just singing a song in your head. Music just lights up every part of our brain and brings every part of our brain to life. And when it's active, it's going to be more efficient in processing information, which is why it's good to have music playing in the mornings when my sensory overload is at its highest. Many people experience sensory overload first thing in the morning because the brain is just not as active when we first wake up, and then we literally bombard it with information, which is another good reason why we shouldn't be picking up our phones and checking emails or social media first thing in the morning. Musical therapy. I am not a musical therapist, but I have been learning a lot about this from Alison Davies, who is an expert in the area of musical therapy, and she's a brain care specialist. I've done a number of her programs, which I find complement all the other brain science that I've been learning and teaching in my coaching. Ali recommends playing a song that is at the same level as your mood. So when you're in a heightened state like anger, playing a song with a high tempo, but a song that you love. Otherwise, it'll just put you in a worse place. So play a song at a high tempo that engages your brain at the level you are operating from, because when it activates your brain and it matches it, it taps into your brain in a way that nothing else can. Then play another song at a slightly lower tempo and keep playing songs and decreasing the tempo each time so that you get to a stage of listening to a really nice calming song and you've naturally brought your brain back down to a normal level of function in a natural, organic way. Ali also recommends creating your own little playlist with purposefully chosen songs that decrease in their intensity to naturally reduce your heightened state of anger. Listening to playlists that you know and love are good because your brain knows what to expect. In the lead up to big events or busy times, make sure your sensory life is minimal to allow more room in your brain for all of that information. So as we head into that ridiculously crazy end of the year, keep everything as simple as you can. Reduce all unnecessary data input to your brain. Manage it through minimalism. Pre-plan and organise as much as possible to avoid all the last-minute stress. Do a brain dump or a thought download and get stuff out of your head and onto paper. Practice mindfulness. Have a good stretch. Throw on some noise-cancelling headphones. Play music to your heart's or your brain's content. And meditate. When our brain struggles to process the volume of information that we are inputting, we experience anxiety. It can be triggered by something seemingly silly, but it isn't that at all. It's just the brain overload, and that's just the one thing that's triggering it all. The biggest thing we can do for our brains is to stop bombarding it with so much information. The internet has created an epidemic of comparisonitis for how we parent, how we live, how we work, holiday, eat, exercise, think, pretty much how we do everything. Our parents didn't have this worry because there was no internet. There was no social media showing other families highlight reels and making them feel bad about themselves. Our parents just got on with the job of parenting however they thought or knew best, without the information overload. Last week, I talked about why resolutions don't work. And it isn't us, it's our brain. It is how our brain is programmed, usually from our childhood. It's because until we learn how our brain works and the little tricks and hacks to unlocking it and reprogramming it, we will keep doing what we've always done, and we will continue to get our habits. Like that information bucket in our brain, we also only have a limited bucket of willpower, which once it runs out, we go back to our old ways of doing and being. Starting December 1st, I am running a free 10-day challenge called Transformation Awaits to help you begin the process of unlocking your mind and busting the BS that's holding you back so you can create new habits and get your brain primed to hit the new year with clarity and intention. If you're interested, please email me or send me a DM and I will add you to the list. The link will be in my show notes. I know it's going to be a very busy time of year for everybody, but the challenge is going to be simple. You'll receive an email from me each day and a live video in the challenge Facebook group daily for 10 days. There is no strings attached, just a pretty bow as a Christmas gift from me to you, and some very easy tasks for you to do daily to get your brain primed and start you off on some new habits and start you busting those stories that might be holding you back. So I would love to see you in the challenge. That is all from me this week. I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast and that you've got a ton of ideas for helping you get through the silly season with your sanity intact. Bye for now. And that, my beautiful friends, is another episode of the Midlife Awakening. If you'd like more inspiration or to connect with other midlifers, head on over to my Facebook group, Deliberately Transformed. You'll find the link in the show notes. Until next time, cheers.